Hey everyone, it's Greg and Sarah here again. We are just hanging out in our PJs and we're so excited to talk with you guys about the book of Leviticus. I know it's your favorite, right? Probably not. It's not a lot of people's favorites, but we just finished Exodus where we found the Israelites have left Egypt. They are at the base of Mount Sinai. Moses has just come down from Mount Sinai after his second 40 days and nights up there with his second set of the 10 Commandments, and he's received the law and the instructions for building the tabernacle. So the tabernacle has now been built, so the glory of the Lord can dwell with them. They're out in the desert. And that's where we find ourselves at the end of Exodus. So now we are ready to jump into the book of Leviticus. So let's start with the first question. I think all of you should be able to get this one correct. So who wrote the book of Leviticus?
Moses. And also maybe some priests added a few things here and there.
Very good. All right. So hopefully you got that one right. When was this book written? Do we know?
It was started to be written in as early as 1440 BC, but there's pieces of it that are much younger than that as well. So it's kind of a compilation, a book of various things that have been put together into a book for a meaning for the people of Israel. So its youngest pieces may be as young as 515 BC. So it might span 900 years that this book has pieces represented.
All right, very good. So what are the main themes that we're going to see throughout this book as we start reading?
Well, in Exodus 29, basically in 29:35 it says, "Do for Aaron and his sons everything I have commanded you, taking 7 days to ordain them." And so the kernel of Leviticus is chapters 8 to 10, in which this actually takes place. So we get to see what is mentioned in Exodus. So it's a nice kind of bridge from what we've read and studied in Exodus to, okay, now God's going to show us what actually took place to ordain this Aaron and his sons. And that happens in chapters 8 through 10, right, kind of in the early middle of the book. So that is an important bridge. Also, this is one of the most distinctive things about Israel is the holiness that they have, and that of course comes from God. But the law is the way that they are holy, and so in a lot of ways, Leviticus is a very important book for Judaism because this is how other nations recognize Israel as different and distinct, because they're holy, and these laws are then how they become holy in God's eyes. And so it's tied to their relationship with God too in that way. And so it's very important for that theme. And then lastly, in the latter part of Leviticus, sacrifice becomes the key way in which sin is atoned for. And so animal sacrifice. And so that becomes a very important theme then for the Day of Atonement, this Day of Forgiveness, and that becomes, and then we see that in Leviticus for the first time, and then also the Sabbath and the year of Jubilee and purity laws become really important in Leviticus and are spelled out.
So as we're going through, like you said, a lot of these different laws and that type of thing, what would you say to those of us that might get caught up in the details of those things, where we're just trying to wrap our head around like why some of these crazy things in our mind might be important to God? Like, what would you say to help us get through those things?
Leviticus 19:2 says, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." And that's a phrase that you hear kind of said over and over throughout the book. And so these are important laws of holiness to God, even though they look trivial to us. And so I think instead of getting caught up in the very fine details of what's actually being asked, just to remember that this is a way that Israel lives out their relationship with God. and it's about holiness and purity, and these are the things God has asked to be done in order to keep that. And so in keeping those, they're actually attending to their relationship with Him, and that's probably the best way to look at it.
Yeah, thanks. That helps a lot. Is there, like, I've talked a little bit about this, but is there like a main, like, big picture? Like, what is God, like, really trying to zero us in on, or what's He really trying to show through all of this?
I think, this is one of the most important and powerful ways in which, again, God seeks to be in relationship with us. And so not only is it and just something that happens for Israel in their life, and it shouldn't be seen as detached from us, but, Christ said that He didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And so this has a greater meaning and importance than maybe even we fully grasp, and how that law might be fully lived out and achieved when Christ returns and brings everything full circle. He's obviously begun that process in His own life, earthly life here, and when He brings the kingdom to completion, we might see a fuller reason for the law in the way that Christ fulfills it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's powerful to think about. Okay, so you mentioned, Jesus Christ here. So how does Leviticus kind of set the stage, or like what's the connection between the old law and what we're going to see in the New Testament with Jesus coming?
In Leviticus chapter 10, there's two sons of Aaron who are priests.
Oh yeah.
And they die in the process of performing some of these rites.
Spoiler alert.
The fire consumes them that they're attending. And it's going to seem to most of you like this is a really trivial death. And you're going to wonder, why would God do this, and why would this happen to the sons? And I won't tell all the story, but basically they die because they're mixing impure with impurity with purity. And so I think one of the things that we see in this is, if this very trivial thing to us causes their deaths, they cannot exist in God's presence because of this, then how could we ever walk before the throne of God on our own merit? And so I think one of the powerful things we see in this story, setting the questions aside and the wrestling of what happens to them, is that we need Christ in order to even think about entering God's presence. And so, one of the most exciting things about the faith is that someday we'll be in God's presence, and we can only do that because Christ makes us pure, not because of our own merit or purity on our own. And I think that story in Leviticus 10 really drives that point home.
Yeah, so literally the veil that used to exist where, to separate the people from where God's presence actually was, that veil was literally torn in two when Jesus died on the cross, right? Which just opened that up so that we could become in His presence and in His glory. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I think that'll really help us to have a better understanding as we go through this, because I know when I've read it in the past, I get caught up in, well, what does this actually mean? Or we don't practice these things today, so I kind of get lost in it. But I think understanding that underlying theme of God wanting to be in relationship with us, and He's wanting us to be set apart and be seen as holy, just sets the stage, for Jesus, because none of us can ever be holy or pure on our own. So that really helps a lot. I hope that really helps you guys too. Do you have any other final thoughts or anything that we should add before we send them on their adventure in Leviticus?
The writer of the book of Hebrews in the New Testament will look back at Leviticus and this time of seeing the importance of sacrifice for atonement, and reinterpret that as Jesus as the final sacrifice of atonement for us. And so in a way we can see some of the fulfillment of the law and the ways that it's moving in, of course, Jesus himself, and the writer of Hebrews brings that home to us throughout the book.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a really exciting thing to think about too.
Yeah, and just to explain, atonement would be, can you explain that a little bit just to make sure I understand the fullness of atonement and what that word means?
Having sin completely forgiven, and the weight and guilt of that, and also the death that would be the implication of it, removed.
So we're going to see things that the Israelites will do for atonement in their day, but Jesus is going to come to replace that atonement.
To be the final Passover lamb for us, that our sins might be passed over.
Yeah, that helps so much. So anything else we should add? Or all right, well, I think Maggie's making some noise over there, so I think I'll go grab her. But have a wonderful time, you guys, with Leviticus. I know that God has some amazing things that he's going to show us through this. So like I said earlier in my other video, don't let Leviticus be a stumbling block. We are going to do this together, and I just can't wait to see all the amazing things God's going to show us through this book. So have a great night, everyone. We'll see ya.
Bye-bye.